All right. Today is September 20th, 2016. My name is Jenny Matz, and it is my honor to be interviewing Barry Levinson for the Archive of American Television in New York City.
Okay.
One take, right on. All right.
I was done.
I'm still
Okay, so we are going to, when Scott tells me we're ready, right at the beginning, we start all of our interviews the same way.
You do?
You know. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm still rolling. Okay.
Yes. Good. Barry. Good. What was your name at birth?
Barry Lee Levinson.
And where and when were you born?
Baltimore, Maryland, April 6, 1942.
And what were your parents' names and what did they do?
My father was Irvin. My mother was Violet. And my father was in the appliance business. He was sort of there at the beginning of discounts, you know, the discount appliance store type of thing. I covered it in a film that I did at Avalon, which sort of, you know, not 100% autobiographical, but touched on a lot of those incidents of that time and family structure and also in terms of career.
Well, we know you didn't follow in his family business, but...
It's one of the things I worked not to do.
Exactly.
My father used to be, I'd see him go over and talk to someone about a refrigerator. And they would be over there 15, 20 minutes looking at and talking about this. And I kept thinking, what could you talk about for 20 minutes about a refrigerator? And he loved it, and he was a great salesperson. And I had no interest. So the idea was, can I please do something else rather than working in my father's appliance store? That was my goal.
Do you think you inherited any traits from either of your parents?
I'm sure I did. I don't know that I can mention specifics.
Well, what were your interests when you were a kid growing up?
Certainly sports. You know, the Orioles and the Baltimore Colts were a big thing. And movies and television. When at a very young age, I remember when the TV came into the house, and I was fascinated by it. And then when I was young, I had problems, so I was ill and I was in a hospital a lot, and I used to, you know, watch, because my father, in those days, they didn't have a television in the hospital. So my father, because he had an appliance store, he had televisions, and he brought a TV in, and I would watch television, and I saw all these different kinds of shows. And then the movies, and you know, every week you went to the movies and you would see, you know, 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday of several different movies, and you know, coming attractions and the newsreels and short subjects and you know, chapter 1 or 3 or 5 of Rocket Man or whatever you had.
Were there any TV shows that you were a fan of that you recall specifically? Made an impact.
Well, I mean, there were the sketch shows, Sid Caesar show, which I was fascinated by. I thought it was really funny, and I liked the sketches. You know, Milton Berle was like the first show that just about everybody saw, but Sid Caesar really kind of stood out for me. And then I liked some of those, some of the original live dramas that they would do.
The anthologies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any idea that this was something you could do or would want to go into?
No, not at all. I remember an incident, and it sticks in my mind, and it's sort of odd in a way. I was in a hospital, and you had the TV, and this is before remote control, so you can't change the channels. And whatever show I was watching, it ended, and now there was this other program that came up, and I hated this thing. I didn't like it, and I couldn't get out of bed, and I couldn't change the channel. And the nurse came in at some point, and I said, "Can you change the channel?" You know, and she said, "You know, why?" You know, and I said, "Well, I don't like the show. It's not very good." And the strangest thing is, she said. And I remember this. She says, "Why? Do you think you can do better?" And I said, "Yes, I could." And you know, I was a kid. And I remember that moment for some strange reason, but I never had to say, oh, I want to go into television. I want to get into the film business. That wasn't even on my radar. I wouldn't even understand how you go about it. You know, I never knew anybody that worked in television or the movies or even in entertainment. I think there was some distant cousin who played a harmonica, and he would play the harmonica. But that was about as close as I could possibly be. I knew nothing about it or to ever think of doing it.
So what prompted you when you went to American University in college?
Well, that was later. I mean, I was not a great student. And I just sort of drifted around, not figuring out what to do. And I was I had a class at this one school, college, and it was accounting. Because I was thinking I'd be an income tax lawyer. Because I saw Paul Newman in the Young Philadelphia and said, "There you go, that's it. I'm going into law." But I had an accounting class. And as soon as I went into the class, I knew this is impossible. I can't possibly do this. The other students had like sharp pencils in their pockets and all that. And so I wouldn't go to the class, but then you keep missing the class, but there's nothing to do. And the main library in Baltimore was around the corner. And I went in there, and they used to have those, sometimes you see that sign, it was like a sort of a graphic finger pointing, to selected reading. And I followed the thing down there, and it happened to be about movies. And then so I started reading the things about movies and about television and about theater, and that's what I did for the entire semester. So every time I had an accounting class, I'd run over to the main library, and for that 45-minute or 1 hour, I would read something about that area. And that was the beginning of my interest. But I didn't think of it as a career. I just thought it was something that I enjoyed. And so when I transferred to another college, they had a course in radio and television. And I took it literally because I thought, well, I listen to radio and I watch TV, so how hard can that course be? I mean, so I was always about what would be easy. What's easy in college? And so radio and television. And then I started to get more involved in it, and so we had to do these radio things and these television things, and you write stuff, and it was all of that, and that was the beginning of going, well, this is actually fun. I like this.
Was it easy?
It was fun. You learned very quickly about certain things and how things went together and how you do it, but it was fun. It wasn't, I wouldn't look at it as education. It was just enjoyable to me, period. And so that's what I pursued. That led to American University, which had broadcast journalism, and sort of they were known in that area. And so I had courses in television there and other things and other subjects. But I focused on that. And then there was a TV course that we had. And there was the teacher was this guy named Jim Silman, and he was a terrific teacher, but he was the program director of Channel 9, which was WTOP television in Washington, D.C. And he took an interest in me, and at one point he said, well, we have a training program at the station, and he said, it doesn't pay much, like $50 a week, but, would you like to be part of that program? And so then I went into television. I was still taking courses at American University, and so I would do like the Ranger House show in the morning with hand puppets, and then I'd run back and I'd take a course, and then I'd run back over there, and then they had the midday news, and then I'd run back and take another course, and then you get ready for the evening news. And so I was just going back and forth because the American University was fairly close to Channel 9, so it was like minutes from one place to the other, and I was doing that, and I loved that. That to me, and again, not thinking of it as a career, but something that was fun to do. It was entertaining for me. I enjoyed that.
Do you recall what your first day was like on a live TV set?
Yeah, it was like a disaster, which I wrote about because in this training program you had to do just about everything. And one of the things you had to do was that you sort of put makeup on some of the guest columnists that would be on the news. And it was Robert Novak. So he would, he's getting ready to go on, and he would do like a column on the air, 5 minutes maybe. And he was a kind of a dark complexion, dark under the eyes and everything else. And so one of the people said, quick, get him made up. And I said, well, how do you do that? You just, powder them up, get them ready, whatever. It was like this, because everybody's running around, so there wasn't time to just sit and have a conversation. It's like you jump in and you do it. And I had no idea what to do. So they had I see the powder thing, because he said powder them. And so I powdered him. I didn't want to get in his eyes, so I powdered around and everything. And because he was running late, and then, quick, we need Novak, get him out there. I got it. All right, you finished with the makeup, get him out. And they got him out there, and they put him in place, and they go, and Robert Novak with so-and-so, and he starts to talk, and I had the headsets on as the floor director, which was what my job was supposed to be. And then I heard the director go, oh my God, he looks like he's dead. He looks like a snowman, he's dead. And I looked over at the monitor, and he was white. He was like white, and where his eyes were, I didn't do it, it was like just black holes. And you could hear the director screaming on the headset, and he said, who did this? And I said, quietly, this is Barry Levinson. What did you do? Look at him. He looks like he's dead. He's dead. Novak looks like he's dead. I said, well, I just was powdering. And he was screaming at me, all during this, while the commentary is going on. And afterwards, I got this just tirade against me and screwing up, the midday news show, et cetera. And that was the beginning of my apprenticeship at WTOP.
Could have been the end too.
It could have been.
But what about it really? Was there a particular area that you were starting to gravitate towards, or just all of it?
Well, I did the news shows where and back then, it's really, when you think about, it seems like a primitive age. One of the things you had to do was make the slides for the news show. The graphics. So if it would be Lyndon Johnson, you'd have a picture of Lyndon Johnson, and then you would photograph it with this Polaroid thing, and then you'd put it into this glass with it taped around it, and you would do all that stuff. But what I began to take an interest in, because was the Ranger Hal show, which was hand puppets, and he would talk, and then you'd move the little hand puppets.
So you were the hand puppet.
I'd work them, Marvin the Monkey, Oswald Rabbit, Dr. Fox, but he pre-recorded everything, so he wasn't a ventriloquist. He would pre-record it, and then you would work that, and it was fun. But then I began to think, well, what happens if they sing this song, or what happens if we do this thing with the visual and the characters dancing to a song, and then what about if it's a Beatles song and we're doing this to it? And I started to play around with the hand puppets and that, and which was fun. And so that was the beginnings of, because they had a massive, because it was also a radio station as well, and they had a huge record collection. And I would listen to music, and I would think about how you can make little sketches with the hand puppets. So little silly things, but that sort of intrigued me.
And were you starting to do editing with composites at that time too, with doing the lead-ins and things like that?
I started doing. Eventually I got into doing some on-air promotion things, where I would take visuals, and then I would cut it, and then I would take some music that I heard that I liked, and I'd cut it together. And so I cut music and visuals together, and for some promos that they would do. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I got some attention, and because of that, I ended up getting a job at WTTG in Washington, which is a Metro Media company then, and they weren't a network, so they didn't have the, because CBS would give most of the trailers and promos for the shows, and all you did was put them on the air. But TTG had to make up their own from scratch. So I began to work with that and do more and more of, kind of on-air promotion.
You probably could have stayed there and had a pretty nice career, but in the late 60s you decided to move to LA. What prompted that?
I was offered a promotion, and I thought, well, gee, what do I do when I get promoted? And he said, well, you run the department. And I said, yeah, but what do I do? He said, well, you run it. You have people like, what you do, and you'll tell them what to do. And I said, but I don't really like telling them what to do. I like to do it. That's the fun part. And so I thought, maybe I ought to just, go on to something else. Because the idea of just being sort of like a head of a department didn't interest me. I only like playing with the stuff. And for some reason, I thought, I'm going to go to LA. So I turned down, that, and I had also turned down another, job. And then I went to LA and didn't really know what to do.
And what happened when you got there? Where did you go? What was
I
your
was
first...
in Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, and I hung around there, and that was sort of the beginning. One of the, and here's what's the craziest part of it. This was late October '67, and so I was just down at the beach, not knowing what to do with your life, and I had a couple $100 to my name, and I got friendly with, a few guys, and there was a guy named, George, and we got friendly. And then he ended up, one day he said to me, he said, look, I have to go up into Hollywood. My car broke down. Can you give me a ride? And now I had not even been up into Hollywood. I'm literally at the beach, not knowing what to do with myself, and somehow seemed content for some reason. So I drive George up. I didn't ask what he had to do. He said, all right, I'll give you a ride. And I went up there, and it's about, it's nearly almost an hour away, so it seemed. And we pull up, and he said, well, come on in. And I said, well, what are we doing? He said, I'm checking out an acting class. I said, well, what am I going to do? He said, well, come in, and I don't want you out in the car. I said, yeah, but this is, it's an acting class. I mean, I wasn't interested. And he said, oh, come on anyway. There's, So I go in, and we were there. And it was much more exciting than in college, when I used to be around the theater department. It all seemed kind of boring to me, and it wasn't lively, and it didn't have a spontaneity, and it all felt very kind of wooden, and I had no interest. But here, whether they were good or bad, there was something going on that was interesting, and there were some attractive girls in the class. And so it was fun evening. And then so we're going back, and George signs up to be an actor. I said, George, this is great. You're going to be an actor? He said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And he said, why don't you join? I said, what do you mean? I don't want to be an actor. He says, what's the difference? Who cares? Be a kick. There's some girls here, whatever. It'll be fun. It'll be a real, kick to do. And he said, and then we can split. I'll drive up, from, the beach, and then you can drive, alternate, and you'll do that. And I said, but I don't want to be an actor. He says, it doesn't matter. What's the difference, And so the next day I drove up, and I talked to the acting teacher, and I said, I'd like, to join the class. And he said, I said, but I don't want to act. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I just want to watch, He said, well, you can't just watch. I said, yeah, I just want to watch. He said, no, you can't do that. If you're going to be in the class, you have to participate, and you have to do these exercises. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you'll do various, scene study, etc. And I said, yeah, but I just want to watch. He said, look, let me just be very clear with you. You either join the class and you participate, or you're not in the class. So I said, all right, I'll come. And so then George and I would do that, and we're both in the class, and for about 2 months, and then George got bored, and he didn't want to do it anymore. And and he was just happy. He'd smoke a joint in the beach chair in the house. He'd watch TV and whatever. And I said, George, I think I'm going to move up, to Hollywood. Because it's too far to go twice a week, an hour up, hour back. It's like 4 hours of driving. And so I moved out and I moved up into the Hollywood area. And I try to explain to people nowadays, I said, you don't understand, you didn't have a cell phone, and unless you had somebody's P.O. box, or they had a telephone, you could never reach them.
Right.
And I said, within months, I lost contact with George. I never knew where he went, and that was the end of George. And, he was the guy who got me involved in the acting school. And the acting school had improvs, and I liked improvs, and the improvs led to sort of the comedy, which led to the comedy writing, and it was the beginning of all of this. Well, what happened to him? I said I never saw him again. I never saw George after that. And I think it was like 2000 or something, and I go to the movies with my wife, and it said Manhattan Beach, 1967. I said, Manhattan Beach, I was there, 67. And so it's George, and George, it's I remember a guy named George, and the movie was called Blow, and George was this guy named George Young, who became the largest cocaine dealer in North America. And I said, that's George. And so the George who got me involved in the acting thing, I never see him, and he becomes like this gigantic cocaine dealer who's involved with the cartel and the thing and the whatever, and that's what happened to George.
Amazing.
So, but he, because of going to that acting school, was the steps, first steps, to beginning what became my career.
And let's go through those steps. So also, you started doing improv, and you met up with Craig T. Nelson, who
In acting class.
And the two of you actually were hired as writer performers on the Lohman and Barkley show. Was that the first kind of real gig you had as a writer performer? And what did you sort of gravitate towards more? The writing, the performing? Did you like all of it?
Well, I never wanted to perform, ever. And in acting class, we did, and Craig and I got into a number of scenes where we did things together, and we used to get laughs. And, we were both broke. He was married, had a kid. And I had said to him, maybe we can play some, clubs or something, and maybe we can pick up some little money. And we put together some material, and then went out and ultimately, started to do a little bit of work, not much, a little bit of work. And then we had some material, and I sent it off, and one of the places was this new show called Lohman and Barkley. And ultimately, Crazy Circumstance got on as writers.
Did you have an agent, or how did that?
No, I didn't have an agent. I didn't have anything. It was just, I'll just send this material off. And if you want the specific of it, this is why, in a sense, and the nature of the business is so crazy, because Craig and I played some various places, and I was sending some material out, and I knew that you needed to have where you sign off on the material. I forgot the term; it just went blank. You have to say a release form, so you send them the material and they can't be sued if they're using something like it. So I knew that much, and one day I ran into Penny Marshall, who was new to LA, and she had seen Craig and I, and she said, well, I'm told her about sending material. She said, well, there's a show just starting called Lohman and Barkley. You ought to check them out, And so I called up the Lohman and Barkley show, and I said, I have some material. Can I have a release form? And the girl on the phone said, a what? I said, this is Barry Levinson. I'd like to have a release form. And she said, just a minute. And then next thing I know, there's a producer. This is John Kay, a producer. And I said, "Oh, hi." I said, I need a release form." And he said, "Well, what do you have?" I said, "I got some material." Now, the reason that she put me in contact with the producer is when I said release form, and she was a temp that day, and somehow the release form sounded rather official. So she was afraid that she didn't want to insult me, that she didn't know what she was doing. So she gave me the producer, thinking that I somehow must, be a big shot of something. And I got to talk to him on the phone, and he said, "Well, where are you?" I said, "I'm at so-and-so." He said, "Well, why don't you come over? You're only 10 minutes away." I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And I went there, and I go in, and I'm meeting with the producer. First time I ever met a producer. And we started talking, and we kind of hit it off. And he said, "Well, come see the show, and, we're going to do it on Sunday." And I told Craig, and Craig and I went over there, and we met Lona Barkley after the show, and there was one other producer, and we got hired.
Just like that.
I mean, it's a crazy fluke, the term release form seemed so official to her.
Now, how did it come about that you were then hired in, I think, 1970 on the Tim Conway show? How did that come about?
Well, we started on Lemon and Barclay as writers, and then we began to write and perform. And then Rudy DeLuca came on as a writer on the show, and then he would write and he would perform. And then that show won a local Emmy and got canceled like the next day. And and right about that point, we ended up going for interviews for the Tim Conway show. And normally there's always two writers, but here there were three of us. And we got on the Conway show.
What kind of sketches were you writing with Tim?
We wrote a lot of physical stuff. A lot of physical things, because he was great with physical comedy.
The old man stuff.
The old man stuff came later. That was on Carol Burnett. But we wrote on the Tim Conway show. We write physical things. I can't remember what they were. These little sketches, and that we did that show. That didn't last long. It was like 13 weeks and got canceled. And then at that point, Craig wanted to go into just focusing on acting. And so then Rudy and I, started to work together, and then we got a show in England that Larry Gelbart was the producer of, and that was the Marty Feldman show.
And you moved to the UK?
And we were there for about a year doing that.
How did you split the duties with Rudy? What was he like as a partner for you to write with?
We took turns typing. That was one of the, no. I typed the last sketch. Typing was like a pain in the ass for everybody. No. I'm telling you, I wrote the so-and-so sketch. I typed that one. So, but we spent all that time with Lomina Barkley and then on Tim Conway. So we kind of just transitioned into the two of us writing, alone, and Craig pursuing acting at that point. And then, and it was great time to be in England, in London, and to be writing as these Americans on a very British type of show. And Larry Gelbart, who was the head writer, and it's ironic because, he goes back to Sid Caesar.
Right.
And he was so quick and so good. So we thought, well, that's what happens when you're the producer, head writer. You know how to do that. And then we almost never met anyone like that again. I mean, you would go in with a sketch. You said, "This good. It'd be nice if you had a sort of there," and he'd like throw out like 6 things that would just make it better. I mean, he was so quick, so sharp, and that period of time was so influential to see someone that you really had to admire and go, wow, this guy really knows his stuff.
Were there any sort of teachable moments that you learned anything about comedy writing from Larry Gelbart?
Well, he was. He was great in so many ways, in terms of the structure of something, in terms of the character and the language. And, you begin to think of that, because he could just somehow sharpen it and color it a little better, where, we might be doing something that was just straighter in a way. And so he had that ability without it being sort of burlesque-like, but it just like pinpoint in terms of his observations and how to correct something. It wasn't like, well, need some work, see what you can do. He immediately can zero in and jump right into it. And to me, I think that was the most impressive person I had met at that point, where you went, wow, this guy, this is a real heavyweight.
Were you a fan yourself of British comedy like Python? And
I loved British comedy. Well, Python hadn't started. In fact, Terry Gilliam was writing or doing, I should say, the cartoons that were part of the Marty Feldman thing, and then the Pythons happened just after that. In fact, when they showed the Feldman comedy machine in America, they took out all the Terry Gilliam stuff, because he said, well, those are cartoons, those are for kids. And they cut them out of the American version. But I loved it, and I always loved going back to seeing as a kid, the Carry On series of the English, et cetera, and early Peter Sellers, and then The Mouse That Roared, and all of that stuff. So I loved that kind of Terry Thomas. So I love those English comedic actors. So for me to be over there and to be playing it, was like, wow, this is as good as it gets.
What did you like most about writing comedy specifically, the structure of comedy and sketch comedy?
Well, first of all, it is a form in itself, because you have to condense it all down to something that's going to run just a few minutes. So it's like, how do you get to that, to the moment? How do you start it? How do you quickly lay out the premise of it? Because you can't spend 4 minutes setting it up. How do you get into it right away? So you need certain ideas that can quickly, capture an audience. And it needs a brevity to it to set it up. And the characters have got to evolve very quickly. And so it is a fast form in a way. And I can't say that I was in love with the idea of writing sketches. But I could teach myself to do that and learn from it. Because I never thought of myself, well, I'm not like, a funny guy, because some of these, comedy writers are just like, boom, just throwing things out. I don't know how to just throw a joke out. I only know how to do it from the standpoint of a character and how they react in behavior. So I can't just rattle off jokes. And so I have to work that way. But you can teach yourself to work within that form. And so, we did a lot of sketch work that can apply for the English, for Feldman, who was, again, another physical comedian.
It's interesting about the brevity, because the next show you worked on, the Carol Burnett show, what's popping in my head as one of my favorite sketches was The Pale, which is, you really went long with that. That was one that you worked on, where it was, do you recall that sketch?
I don't remember it that well.
It was the one where she's in the doctor's office and Harvey Korman is the shrink, and it's like a long, several minute long sketch where they develop, he was the bully.
It's funny, I can't remember.
Okay.
There's some sketches that, because, and I don't, unfortunately, I don't think I have the archives to ever look back,
I'll show it to you later.
On that stuff. So I'm not sure in that. But, you can evolve certain things, and a lot of the physical stuff. So that's where we developed, in terms of with Conway, the old man, they come up, and all you have to do is, if you hit, what's a good thing for the old man to do? If you hit the right thing, it's immediately going to it'll be funny. So if you take the old man and how slow he is, and so you'd say, okay, what about a sketch where Harvey Korman jumps into the cab and he says, to the airport and make it snappy. And then there's this long pause, and all of a sudden, the old man, Tim Conway as the cab driver, just looks in the rearview mirror and he goes, a passenger, and so you've begun. It's to the airport and make it snappy. And then Tim pulls out the Thomas guide, airport, AI, and Harvey's, pushing them to get on with it. So right away you have an idea that will work. And then the question is, what jokes do you want to stack up based on this old guy and how slow he's going to be? And then you go from there.
On the Carol Burnett show, how involved were the players with the writing process? Did they stick to the script or did they improv with you?
They were. What was so great about Carol and her group is that they, other shows that were on, they would read cue cards, and they didn't. They memorized the sketch, so they were really playing the material, as opposed to here's a line like the Bob Hope thing. Bob Hope show would be like they're doing the set up the joke, the set up the joke, the set up the joke, and they'll read the cue cards. And Burnett, they worked the material, and she played it as a character, and Harvey was a character, and Tim was a character, and Vicky was a character, and they worked it from characters. And so that's what was so great. And sometimes they would find another moment and they would add a thing here and there, and Tim would certainly do that. But they were very the way they dealt with the material, they dealt with it, I think, as well as you can do. There wasn't like, well, that's not working, give me another joke or whatever. They worked that material, and sometimes you do alterations to it. But they didn't take it lightly. They really dealt with the script and the character, and then you can make adjustments. Not that you had a whole long time to make adjustments. You had to do it quickly and on your feet.
What was the process like with the writer's room? Were you assigned sketches, or did you pitch sketches?
No, what would happen is there was, it's funny, like I see all the names nowadays. I think there were only 9 or 10 writers on Burnett. I don't think there's like 32 writers, or I see nowadays like a lot of writers. There were only 9 or 10 of us. And sometimes they would say, look, they'd like to do a piece on this. But more often than not, it was just you came up with an idea. And that's what you did. So you'd come in and you say, what about this idea? Blah, 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 so they might say, well, go ahead and do it. Or you would just write it and send it in.
Were you on set as well when they performed it?
We were there. This is how quickly it worked. They would get the script on Monday. Monday and Tuesday, they started to go over it. Wednesday, there would be like, they'd put it on its feet in front of the writers, the producers, and wardrobe people and whatever, but they were in street clothes, and they would do that on that afternoon. Then we would meet in the office afterwards and go over the sketches and see if they need to fix anything. Thursday they'd start to block it and then start to add the costumes and shoot Friday. And they would do two shows, I think at 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock. And they would do it like from beginning to end. It wasn't like 20 minutes to let's set up for this. They literally just roll it in, roll it out, literally like a live show, except it was being taped. And it was extremely efficient the way it ran. Extremely efficient and incredibly, and obviously with Carol at the top, they really worked the material, and you could see her on Wednesday, it's like she's got a toe in the water. And then somehow when they start to put those costumes on, all of a sudden like, whoa, I mean, pretty amazing. Sometimes you'd stand and watch the Friday's first show, and you go, wow, from Monday, and here it is on Friday, and all of a sudden, look at her and her crew. They were suddenly like alive and etc. And she would latch onto that character that seemed to come, like the day before, where she sort of got the handle on it. Seemed to be it's when it was somehow when she got into costume, she began to figure out the character more so, and then it would explode. It was I don't remember a situation where you go, I don't think she was as good as, she was always better than. She was better than whatever was on the page. She always elevated it. And I think she raised that bar for everybody. So Harvey was up there, and Vicky came up there, and Tim was up there. They were like at the top of their game.
Did you ever have to deal with anything from standards and practices on that show? Any pushback with censorship?
I don't remember that.
None. Mm-hmm.
No.
Now, you won 2 Emmy Awards, I believe, working on that show. Did those honors mean anything to you at the time?
Well, I mean, it was nice, so it was, it was good to have, You were like part of a group, and the show was considered, a really good show. So it was nice to be connected to something that people thought, had some value.
Why did you leave the show?
We got involved with Mel Brooks and became writers on Silent Movie. And
went right from one to the other?
Yeah, we went from Silent Movie to High Anxiety, but we were doing Carol Burnett, and then we got to do Silent Movie. And I think Silent Movie overlapped the Conway during the writing period. I think it overlapped. I think we were doing both. And then, like Burnett finished, and then we were full-time on Silent Movie. And by the time we're going to go to High Anxiety, then we decided, well, let's just stay and, work in film and, not continue the Burnett show.
How did that come about, that you were involved with Mel Brooks?
It was from doing the Tim Conway show that we did, that Ron Clark was a producer, he and Sam Bobrick. And so they were producers of it, and we seemed to hit it off. And he called. We were working Burnett show. I'll never forget the phone call. He called up. He said, "Listen, this is Ron Clark." He said, "I got an idea for this film. I'm going to meet Mel today for lunch, and I'm going to recommend that you guys would be great, to be co-writers on it. And I'll let you know how it goes." And so I never hanging up. I said, "It's Ron," and Rudy's sitting across from me. "What do you want?" He says he's got an idea for a movie with Mel, and if it works out, he'll talk to us this afternoon. And Rudy looked at me like, "Yeah, okay, that's going to work out, right?" And literally at 2:30, Ron Clark calls it. I met with Mel. He loves the idea. I said, "What's the idea?" He said, to make a silent movie. I said, "A silent movie?" He said, "Yeah, he'd love to. He wants to meet you guys tomorrow." And we went, "All right." And we went over and met Mel that next day. And as I remember it, was like, "Okay, well, let's do the movie, and you guys will be the writers along with Ron Clark and Mel Brooks as well."
I mean, just thinking about you.
It seems crazy.
Well, you were talking about how you were watching, the Sid Caesar show, and you were so enamored by all of those writers, and here now you're working for Mel Brooks and having just come off Larry Gelber. I mean, were you being just infused with the comedy gods of just speaking?
Well,
it
is strange. I mean,
Yeah.
as a kid to see Sid Caesar show, not really knowing anything about the writers, and then suddenly work with Larry Gelbart, and then all of a sudden work with Mel Brooks. That was pretty amazing, without question. So and that happened quickly because I came out in I think the fall of '67, and this was say by '74. That we're now writing with Mel Brooks on a film. So it did come about quickly.
Now, just talking about turning from, obviously we're going to focus mostly on your television career, but we're going to obviously have to talk some about the film career because it's a long and impressive one. But was there any conscious decision that you made to leave television? Was there any limitations you felt in that field that you wanted to explore film more, or did it just sort of all happen naturally?
It evolved. I don't think I had, when some people have a sense of the direction of where they're going, I didn't. I only sort of reacted. And it was basically an idea or something that would drive me to it. So, look, I was very happy doing silent movie and then doing high anxiety, and Rudy and I did a couple specials, I believe, somewhere mixed in there, and so I was very happy, doing that. And to be honest with you, it was Mel Brooks who was most influential in terms of, breaking off in terms of doing a feature, of my own, is when I would tell him about these diner guys. And I was only telling it in stories. And I would tell him, and he said one day, you should write that. You should write that, And he said, and I'll never forget it, we were outside of the commissary at 20th Century Fox. He said, you should write that. He said, Fellini, did, gee, I just went blank on the name of his film. How bizarre. About, these young men, and it'll come to me. And he said, he did that. So you should write about, those guys. And it stayed in my head. And then during, when we were on a break from something, and it was like a 3-week period, I suddenly, I think I hit on the idea that what happens if it starts basically at Christmas and ends on New Year's Eve? And just everything happens in that 5-day period. And as soon as that framework occurred to me, then all of a sudden I wrote it. And it was very quick. It just sort of went, oh, but Mel was the one who said, why don't you write about that?
And what about the idea to direct it yourself? How did that come about? Why did you want to? And how were you given that opportunity?
Well, mixed in here and jumping back and forth, there were a couple, things I wrote with Valerie Curtin. We did it, Injustice for All. Mm-hmm. And that, in a sense, as I think of it now, if it didn't happen, it would have come later, because that was really the diner guys that went into law. That's where the stories came from, because when the guys I grew up with and hung out with that became lawyers told me all these stories and said, the law has nothing to do with this Perry Mason world that television shows. It is much more unruly. It's much more chaotic. It's crazy. It is like, and they told me all these stories. And I told Valerie about it, and then I began to think of that. So ultimately, we had some success with that. But I was curious what it would be like if I wrote and directed it so it was exactly what sort of it was in my head, and that the rhythms would be that. And that was the first time I really began to think about that. Now, obviously, it was influenced by, Mel, in a sense of working on him, because we were around while it was being shot, and you had the video monitors, and you would look at the various setups, and then what happens with your mind? You go, gee, I wonder if the camera would be over there. what would happen if you did this? You know, I mean, your brain just starts firing off things. Well, what happens, you know, not that it's right or wrong, that it just suddenly you begin to see certain things. And then when I thought of writing Diner, I wanted the opportunity to do what I had in my head. So it's not just what's on the page, it's what does it look like, and what are the rhythms of it, and how much can you strip away if you're doing a movie in the 50s so it doesn't become like a 50s-like movie where it's sort of a make-believe version of it. I was trying to figure how close can I get it to what it was? How close can I get to the bullshit talk to make that interesting? And not make it this anything other than highlight the ordinary. Can I highlight the ordinary in a sense? That's what was starting to happen in my head.
Were you worried that if another director had taken it on, that would have been hard to translate to them, what that vision was in your head?
Yeah, I just thought, well, look, why can't I just do it? I want to see what it's like, you know, to make it that way.
Was there ever pushback from the...
No, I was lucky in that regard because, you know, I wrote it and, you know, I was able to get to direct it.
Was that your first time? Was it Peeping Times the first time you directed, or was Diner the first film you directed?
Peeping Times was, I'm not sure where that fits in there. I may have done, I might have done something in, you know, 1 hour TV things.
But
where
you had the you felt like you could.
But this is where I wanted to like have it look the way I wanted it to look.
Was there
And the way they talk, you know what I mean? Because sometimes I go, oh, it's not supposed to be that way. That sounds too important. It's not supposed to sound so important, you know? So just wanted to make it, you know, happen rhythmically and visually the way you wanted it. I didn't want it to look, you know, bright and gay and stuff and, you know, just like, you know, Grease, I think, was before, you know, Diner, and Grease had that, you know, that kind of patina and everything is, you know, larger than life. And that's a form that, you know, is around, and I understand it. But I say, but what else? What happens if we look at these people this way? And that's all was popping around in my head.
Can you talk about what you did with the audio and how that came about with having everyone mic'd?
Well, what happened on that issue, it's one of these happenstance things. You know, MGM was making the movie, but obviously they didn't really care about the movie. You know, it was cheap. They had a lot of big productions going on. We were like a real inexpensive movie at that time. And excuse me. What happened, there was a fire, electrical fire in the diner. So we literally lost an entire night because in order to get the rewiring and the fixing, we lost the night. So we needed an extra day, and the studio said, no, you can't have it. You have to make do, you know? I said, well, but now we're doing the diner stuff. But no, you have to work around it. So Peter Sova, who was a cinematographer, was a Czech cinematographer. He was a terrific person, and somehow understood Diner so well. You know, he never came from the, you know, that world. He comes from Czechoslovakia back then. A completely different sensibility, but somehow he understood. And so I said to Peter, I said, what are we going to do? They're not going to give me another day. And he said, why don't I get the other camera and we'll shoot 2 cameras? I said, you know, oh, well, that's good. Let's put 2 cameras. So we'll do, and so we're shooting one direction, say it's a 2-shot and a single, or some variation of. And the very first take, as it turns out, we do something, and I said, oh, good, okay, print that. And the audio guy said, we have a problem. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, the people off camera are overlapping. I said, well, you know, yeah, they have to overlap because that's the only way they talk. He said, yeah, but if they overlap, then it messes up the tracks. You can't do that. He said, don't have them overlap, and then when you do the other, then you can make it overlap. I said, I know, but that doesn't feel right, because for the performance, if they don't overlap one another, it's wrong. He said, but they're off camera, and the sound's no good. And so I said, well, then why don't we mic them off camera? Mic them, just have the mics off camera, and they're mic'd. You say, yeah, but then you may not have, they may say something and it won't match when you go to do the other. I said, I don't care. I just want it to sound the way it's supposed to sound. I'll figure out how we're going to edit around that, because maybe they say something good off camera and I never got it, but that's okay. I don't have to see everybody say everything. So there's going to be people talking off camera anyway. So I just want the freedom for them to just say and talk and not feel as if they can't overlap, because it needs to be messy. It has to be messy. That's the way we talk to one another. So we went, all right, now so we have to mic the people off camera. And that was the beginning of it. So it started to sound the way I thought it should be. Now Altman did those things, but I wasn't aware of what they were doing, etc. I was just trying to figure out how do I get people to sound like it's a conversation, a messy conversation. But I want it with enough clarity so you can't go, what did he say? But that was the key to it. And so it was because of that, losing the day, we had to pick up time and 2 cameras and overlapping with micing everybody. Let me get some water here.
And it's something you stuck with after that too. It was a happy, I guess, accident.
And then I did it always after that.
Yeah. Was there anything else as a first-time feature film director that you had maybe didn't go the way, it didn't turn out into a happy accident, maybe went a little south, that you had to learn to correct on your feet?
I have to think about that. I'm sure that's the case. But but I'll tell you one thing, which is not a direct answer to what you're saying. We went to look at locations, and so I go with the production designer, and he said, "Okay, this is Eddie's bedroom." And I'm looking at the thing, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, "Where would I put the camera? Where does he get up? How does he? How I can't? Why?" And he said, "This is a great spot, and I don't know how to shoot this scene." Now we go to another location. I'm saying this to myself. And I go to another location, and he said, "This would be great for so-and-so." And I'm looking, and I go, "Where do I put the camera? I don't know where the people are. I don't know where they move. I don't know how I can't see it. I can't picture it. I don't know how the scene works, So I'm getting like, geez, I'm in over my head here. I have no idea where these actors are supposed to be. I don't know where the camera's supposed to be. I can't figure anything out. Nothing makes any sense to me. I'm going, this is terrible. So we get in the van to go to another location. I'm literally going, I'm lost. I have no idea what I'm doing. And we go to the next location, and he says, all right, this is so-and-so. And as soon as I look at it, I went, oh, I immediately can see where everybody's supposed to be, and then that, and I can see where the light would be, and how you can choreograph it, and where the camera can be, and all. And it was like, bang, there, I can see the whole scene. And then there was that moment of relief, and then I said to the production, I said, by the way, the other 2 locations, they're not good enough. We have to find something else. But that's what I used. If I walk into a location and I can suddenly see it, that's it. And that's the only thing I went by. If I can see it, it works. I know how it should be lit. I can see how you can do all the things you want to do. And if you go to a certain location and you have no idea, it's not the right location. And that's the rule, basically, I've gone by.
Do you use a similar rule when working with actors, with giving them direction to work through?
My feeling in terms of directing is, I would say it's like controlled freedom. I want everybody to do and feel as free as they can to move around and not suddenly go, no, when do I say that? I turn when I say somehow it gets too technical and it can bog you down. So I wanted to find a way where it is naturally comfortable to them, and at the same time serves how we want to put the pieces together. And so that's really it, as opposed to here, turn here when you say the line or whatever, because then it starts to become a mechanical process. And it works. Certain directors can do all that. I wanted to be able to accomplish it where everybody feels as loose as they can feel.
Were there any moments on Diner that sort of evolved organically like that, that you didn't have in the script, that you sort of just went with? From the actors?
No, I think I remember a couple of things like with Paul Reiser. You know, I think I was smart enough to know not to put in some of the dialogue that he would have, because they would go, well, what is this all about? You know, how does this forward the plot kind of thing, you know? So I left out certain things. And then with Paul, and I thought that he can deliver it, that I would find certain things. So like, I think we had a little time at the end of the night, and when they're leaving to go home, and I said, why don't we do a little scene, Paul, you know, about, you know, ask Gutenberg if he's going home and if he's not going home, and if he get a ride, et cetera. But not that I'd like a ride, that, you know, you don't get to that. And by then we had already a shorthand that Modell never asked for anything with any clarity whatsoever. It's, if you're going, I'll go. I mean, if you're not going, you know, I don't. And so with the idea that that's what it is, and that goes back to the fact of having worked in improvisations and starting out, we already know the characters, we already know the sequence. He's going to go home with them, and this is the little thing. And literally, I think it's one shot. I don't even know if I did any cuts to it because we didn't have much time, but let's just do that. And then that would be it. And there are little places where we tried some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, when the film initially came out, it wasn't received with the huge success and had in later years. It was kind of quiet until you had a couple good reviews. Can you talk about that, about the importance of, you know, Pauline Kael wrote a great review.
Well, what happened was, you know, I said with the first movie that I did, you know, I think I got to experience the highs and the lows all in one film, because the studio saw it, hated it. It opened in St. Louis, terrible review. I think it was St. Louis, Phoenix. It was all these strange places, and only four cities, 4 screens, and 4 bad reviews in those places. We opened in Baltimore, and we actually had a bad review, but the reviewer was reviewing the locations. It was like, well, they were going down Charles Street, they should have been going up Charles Street, how did they get over to St. Paul Street? I mean, it was that kind of review, because there weren't many movies made in Baltimore. And so it was one of these oddball reviews. And it was pulled out of distribution. It had it ran in 4 theaters, 1 weekend, gone, never to be seen again. The end of Diner. And so not many people, most critics even got to see it. It was only those critics in Minnesota or wherever, Phoenix, those places, those few cities. And we were basically never to be seen again. That would have been the end of Diner. And there was this circumstances, without going into all the great detail of it, the circumstances sort of converged to sort of give it a rebirth. One is Judith Crist, who was a film critic, used to have these a weekend film seminar type of things in Terrytown. And so she would, people would stay over and they'd show various films, etc. And she was going to have Victor Victoria shown, and Blake Edwards was going to attend. And the movie, as I remember, wasn't ready. so they couldn't have the screening, and that her weekend was going to be based on Victoria and Blake Edwards. And this was the second time that MGM couldn't deliver the film they were supposed to deliver, and they were really anxious, and she was a critic. You know, they didn't want to offend. And there was somebody who liked Diner and said to Judith Crist, well, look, you know, Barry Levinson, who's written with, you know, Mel Brooks and on Silent Movie and High Anxiety, you know, you can show those films and he can talk about, you know, working with Mel, and he did this film, you know, Injustice for All, that he co-wrote, and you can show that, and we can show his new film, you know, Diner, and blah, 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 right? And so you can make a weekend of, you know, these other films. And so that seemed okay to her. And then in order for me to be flown to New York, it was a thing about flying me there for this. So he said to the accounting, no, he's going to go to New York, but he's also going to do some press, et cetera. And I'm like, oh, okay, but so that's fine. He'll go to New York, he'll do the press, and they'll show the Terrytown thing. The movie's supposed to be gone and forgotten. That's the end of it. At the same time, Mark Johnson was the producer. His mother knew Pauline Kael and had mentioned it, and she says, I never heard of this movie. And so they set up to have a screening for Pauline Kael. So now I went into New York on my way to go to Terrytown, and I do some interviews with some of the critics who've now seen it, because we made a little press thing from the guy who liked it. So now they suddenly have seen it. And so Mike Schrago, Rolling Stone, sees it, and then someone else sees it, and then Pauline Kael has seen the thing or whatever, and I do that. And then Pauline Kael called MGM and said, when is the movie opening? Because I love the film and want to give it a really strong review. And they said, well, we don't have any plans to release the film. And she said, as I understand it, well, I'm going to run the review in the New Yorker anyway, even if the movie's not playing in the United States. I'm running a really strong, positive review. And Rolling Stone is going to come out with this strong review. And then MGM, on a Wednesday, they had a film playing, I think, on the festival on 57th Street. The movie wasn't doing well, so they said, all right, Diner's going to open on Friday to 2 days' notice at the festival. And so it opened, and then all these reviews broke. So then there's Pauline Kael, there's Rolling Stone, and the New York Times, and et cetera, and all of a sudden all these like rave reviews, you know. And, you know, we did well on Friday, and and to add to the craziness of it all, I was in New York, and Sidney Pollack is getting ready to do Tootsie. And somehow I was with him to, you know, give him some thoughts about the script or whatever. And I was up in his apartment, which was at right near 57th Street. And it's raining like crazy, and it's late afternoon. And he knows that the diner is, you know, playing there right on 57th Street. And if there would be a crowd forming, you would be able to see the crowd coming to Fifth Avenue, right? And I don't see anybody from way up top there. And he said, knowing that I'm thinking about Diner on Saturday, and he said, you know, they'll come, they'll stand in the cold or whatever, you know, but the rain, you know, it's always tough to have people, you know, line up in the rain, you know. And I said, yeah. So anyway, I have to go meet Mark Johnson. We're having a dinner someplace with a few people. And I get into the cab. I leave, you know, Sidney Pollack. I get into the cab. We go up 57th Street. It's raining like crazy. I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody. I've never been into the 57th Street, you know, into the festival, but there's nobody there. And so I go to the place, and I'm sitting there with Mark and some of the people, and he said, you stop by the, you know, festival? And I don't want to say to him, yeah, but there's nobody there, Mark. It was like deserted. We had one good night and then no one's coming again. So I didn't want to say anything, thinking he hadn't gone by. I said, no. He said, sold out. I said, really? What? He said, yeah, you know, what they did is because it's raining, they had everybody come in and there's a downstairs. So everybody came in, you know, it was sold out. I said, sold out? Wow. And so that was the first inkling that, you know, we would have a successful weekend. And the MGM response is, well, it's a very good first week, but let's see what happens, you know, the second week. And so the second week it broke the house record. And we said, well, so we're going to open, you know, why? Well, you know, we don't know. It's New York, you know. So we go to like Boston and second week break the house record. Are we going to go out wide? Well, we're not sure. We ended up going to Toronto, broke a house record in the second week. Seattle, Washington broke a house record. And they still, actually, Diner was never, ever released nationally. It never played. It literally, I think they had a couple hundred prints, and it kept playing theater after theater after theater for the entire year around there, but never had that national opening. They never could see how the movie could work. So you know, Mel Brooks has a great, you know, line. He said, it's like when you go see a preview of your film, you know, it's like you got this barometer, and you're going, you know, good, I'm out of the business. Good, I'm out of the business. And that's the way Diner was. It's like, oh, I'm out of the business. Oh, wait a minute, I'm back. And so in one movie, you saw all the sides of it.
Right. Now, there was actually a TV pilot pitch for Diner, but that didn't happen. Why do you think it wouldn't have worked as a TV series? Or do you think it would have?
I think it would have. We did shoot it. We shot. You know, I wrote and directed the pilot, and we did it, and it worked. It worked, you know, reasonably well. I've never seen it since I did it, but the reaction from CBS is, well, the show is really good, but it's not compatible with our other shows. You know, I mean, what do you do about that? It's like, we like it, but it's not compatible with these kinds of sitcoms because it didn't have a laugh track. It was a half-hour comedy drama like the movie, and there had never been at that time a comedy drama, you know, on television, no laugh track to tell anybody how to react or whatever, and so it was too experimental.
Do you think in general, TV or film being pigeonholed as you have to pick a genre to just to market the film? I mean,
Mostly.
So was it, I mean, people I think at the beginning characterized that film as a drama. Do you think it was a drama?
Well, it is a drama, and the reason that it's humorous is because that's the way we react at times. Because I don't see it because there's no jokes in it. It's just how you behave with one another. It's what you don't say to one another. It's relationships are never like, you know, look, we've been friends for a long time now, haven't we? You know, there's none of that. You just know they're friends by the way they talk and react. And the problems, they never express the problem with the clarity because we don't generally do that. We're much more obscure with so much of it. That's just the way we are. And that was the premise of it. So to me, it is a drama that's humorous because that's our behavior, not because, well, this is funny in and of itself. You know, now there are a few things like it because it's going to get to that, but it's, you know, it's like what's on the flip side, you know, with, you know, talking to his wife about it is not fall down on the ground funny, but on one hand we can enjoy their inability to communicate and what is important to him that's not important to her, and how do we deal with one another. So rather than talking about the specifics of the relationship and where the real problems are, it's all gotten basically hidden in a conversation of what's on the flip side. So that to me is what it is. So it comes out at times in this oddball way of expressing ourselves, but I think that in many ways is how we function. We're very seldom completely direct.
We're going to take a quick break.
Sure.
So first, like, do you need to get up?